Well, good evening. Maybe we could now start. Good evening to those of you who are listening to us from the internet, from Zoom. This is an event that is framed within the cycle of the Red-Green Dialogues that has been promoted by the Greens Foundation, the European Greens Foundation, the GAT, with the support of the New Horizons Foundation. To tell you the truth, when Mark asked me to present and moderate this panel, well, I wasn't sure, or we weren't sure what would come out of it. We've been having a rather tough year. The disinformation and extreme right. More things have happened since we got this first call inviting us to participate. This event comes very timely. I'd like to kindly ask you to feel depressed. Rather, let's make it a food for thought event, sort of, therapeutic up to a point, putting things in common. But we have had rather tough weeks. But when facing this, we better think jointly, sharing ideas rather than working on our own from our homes, observing the news and seeing what's been happening in the US, what's happening in Twitter. Now I go to another social media or see. Well, what happened with the president of the Valencian community, who disappeared for 5 hours? Oh, we have so many news in this context of disinformation, extreme right, or misinformation, or change of focus, because sometimes information or disinformation is, well, a matter of changing our focus of attention. And on the other hand, the absolute polarization that leads us to contexts like what we saw this week, blockage of the European government, the political anger blocks institutions in Europe. So we have many things to say. We have COP29 in Azerbaijan. We have all the ingredients needed so that this debate is very fruitful. And we also have good profiles with our guests to be able to talk about this. We have a lawyer, a journalist, and a historian. When we have to, we have to talk about democracy, disinformation, the right to information, and to fight against the extreme right presentations, we have to find answers. What we have lived in history that gives us some hints to try to interpret the present, and what are the similarities to find the tools to face this situation. Which are the institutional tools, the legal tools that we have to use also in such a complex context? It seems like it's a David against or versus Goliath to regulate these platforms that move very quickly and that are articulated in the shadow. And also how we find news amongst so much fake news and disinformation, etc. Here we have the role of journalism, where every person can inform or disinform in any situation, in any moment. I think these are the basic ingredients of this debate. We wanted to reframe it because this is an event promoted by the Green European Foundation. Well, speaking about how this is eroding institutions in the European framework, how this is being perceived in different countries from the diversity and many other common, how this affects the middle of a climate crisis, this disinformation. The Paris Agreement seemed like an enemy to defeat from the extreme right, and they are in the middle of this disinformation. or an enemy to fight against, to determine different elements. And then we have the enemies to generate a cohesion in how do we articulate the workers' class, the feeling of belonging versus the building of enemies or binary histories to be able to articulate the building of other majorities or other hegemonies. Remembering all the things, and before I give the floor, well, I never told you who I am. I'm a politologist. But to tell you the truth, I've worked in the world of politics for a long time. Now I can see it with a certain distance. But I always say that it would be hard for me to be active because I get lost when interpreting what's happening. I lived the beginnings of this new wave. This wave has been so fast. I remember when I was in the Congress, when Rafael Hernando talked about climate change, and he said these were Mayan beliefs. There was a question in the parliament. At the time, the reaction was still, well, being, astonishment, being astonished. Certainly, Rafael Hernando from PP, from the Popular Party, wanted to be under the focus of attention. But all the programs really echoed this as a hilarious thing. And while he was portrayed as an ignorant, I'm speaking about 11 years ago, approximately. I've been able to live this context of trying to find this change in the focus using reports. Well, I had to focus on things. For example, we live this situation in the city council of Barcelona. This generates head news, capturing different sources of information. But this change, the change in paradigm, happens everywhere at all times. And this feeling of vulnerability is growing and growing. It's clear that we have to articulate new tools, obviously, both in history as well as in journalism, as well as in laws. We have to find the answers, and that's why we have to present the people that are here with us to help us. We have Maria-Giovanna. She had to be here with us, but the airplane was delayed and it was impossible for her to join us. Hi, Maria. How are you? Can you hear me
Hola.
okay? Hi, hi.
Estoy bien, sí.
Maria works, well, no, she speaks Spanish. She works in the European Green Group. She's a lawyer and she works in the area of human rights, but she's also followed all the European regulations in the context of digital platforms, digital rights, the right to information, and how to articulate it. So she can tell us a lot more on how things have changed. Another element that has aged in 10 years. I remember when we were speaking about Europe, the example of transparency was how could we know the agenda of the Euro MPs? Now, this is so much out of context with that huge amount of influences that come from all over the place, or that do not need the physical presence because we have many other instruments to have an influence in legal changes. But Maria maybe will give us that context. We have Pere Rusiñol. Most of you know him. He's a journalist, a partner of Alternartivas Economicas and Economic Alternatives in Mongolia. And he's a person particularly active in the resistance. Good journalism shed some light on those things that traditionally journalism don't cover actively. That's why we have to put our focus on things such as the electric market, things that are so complex that if you do not explain them in a certain way, nobody will understand what's happening. And now, well, he continues working from different areas, and that's why we believed that he was going to be a relevant voice for us. And on the other hand, Forti, he's a historian, a professor of the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, history. He's the author of articles and different books The last one, Extreme Right 2.0? No. Okay, one of the last books. Well, obviously, it's someone who's generated chronology and similarities to learn from history, and also to give us or to put the focus on what we are doing currently in the neoliberal context, in the context of the extreme right. Having introduced the speakers, we'll try to be active. Maria, I'll give you some minutes to make a brief introduction of the context, how from your area of expertise see this situation, this current situation, particularly with European vision, understanding that each one has well, your own profile, but maybe you could analyze this context of disinformation and how to undertake a work of response in the European framework, in your case, for example, and the regulation in the community uh, environment. Maybe, Maria, you could start with your presentation. Hello, good evening, and thank you for being here. I thank you for having organized this event at a political, such a delicate political moment. I'm so sorry not to be here presently today. As you very well said, I had a problem when getting my airplane. So thank you for organizing this connection via Zoom. I work in the European Parliament, where I closely followed the work done when legislating about such complex topic, disinformation. As you know, this generates many challenges of different types. On the one hand, for example, as you know, since the European elections, we could see how, in the electoral context, disinformation can erode public trust and the credibility of the processes, and maybe attack the right to the political participation. Secondly, how, well, as you very well know, the effect of disinformation can include examples of fanatism or hate against women or the other so-called others. This is a menace against the minorities and people affected, but also in inclusion and social cohesion. And this is the central element of today's event. We've very well seen in the last few weeks how disinformation can magnify tensions and divisions in the moments of crisis and emergency, of natural disasters, and generate key political moments. Considering these challenges in the last legislation from the groups of the groups of in the group of the Greens, we've been able to develop a new European legislation which observes disinformation as one of its sources, and that we implement since February 2024. It's a new European regulation of digital services. I'm sure you heard about it. It's a regulation that intends to approach through self-regulation, that the supervising self-regulation of platforms, all the problems that this means for the informative freedom, the right to expression, freedom of expression, and noxious contents. And the legislation, however, is not covering damaging content in the widest context, because it's a lot more difficult to define what damaging content is. That's why the regulation talks about negative or harmful content. This regulation is to create a safe place, digital safe place, both for the platforms as well as for users, introducing new obligations to fight against all information distortion, disinformation, and against the dissemination of illegal content. This maybe hate speech, dissemination of illegal against or for minors, dissemination of information, manipulation of services in the democratic process, such as the elections or public safety, among others. What I would like to point out, however, is that there are many different obligations that are, as I told you, being implemented or pending to be implemented. But the most important is that these new obligations are oriented towards platforms defined as big platforms or with a high reach. This means that they have to be platforms of social networks with a reach of over 45 million users in the European Union. And this is a first important step. Because, for example, platforms such as Meta or X would be included in here, but other platforms that are smaller but that are relevant, such as Telegram, would be out right now. And this is something that I would like to point out. Secondly, as I told you during the negotiations, we insisted so that this regulation approaches disinformation in its widest sense as possible, as big as possible, to include false or fake news. But this has not always been possible, as you can imagine. And we have other ways to see the regulation of disinformation. For example, in France, as you probably know, the authorities can intervene directly. This is something that at the level of European Union is not possible yet. We hope that maybe in the future, near or mid future, the European legislatures can try to review or revisit this topic. Well, I wanted to mention a final topic that is quite important. Disinformation is not something that exists in the void. Trying to solve disinformation through regulations such as the digital service regulation, as I mentioned, without approaching the more general conditions in which disinformation is propitiating this situation, will not be possible. We won't be able to succeed in this endeavor, in this approach, in this way of working, actually. Therefore, we don't have to forget our legal actions. This is what we're trying to do. I'm speaking about the social dimension of the debate of disinformation, because disinformation usually is a symptom of inequalities in which discrimination, deeply rooted in society, institutions are more frail when considering the elections, the loss of trust in the government structures by the citizens, and the limited state of the art, the menace, coexistence, and the pacific life in our societies, as we very well know in this delicate political moment. Well, I would like to thank you for this invitation, and I am open to talk to you about this very important topic. Thank you, Maria. I think you made a very good review with your final comments, because I believe that from proximity, analyzing what's happening is very important. What is the social context where this information is landing? Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Obviously, this is the big topic of interest. The problem is that we don't know, actually, no one knows how to approach this, because obviously this is not something that we'll be able to approach from the legal perspective and repression, because it's very complex, that forces us to devote many more sessions, because it's generated many problems. In the year 2016, we had the Brexit, and Trump won for the first time based on disinformation strategies in social networks. There was no AI at that moment. Imagine what's happened since then, and the magnitude of what can be done and what will be done. Well, we have programs in the market that just by paying 20 years, any person speaking can generate a replica with the same voice, with the same tone of voice. I can say anything they want in Chinese, for example. It costs 20 euros per month. I can be talking about climate change, saying it's fake, it's not true, me or any political leader. Imagine what can be done with 20 euros per month. If we add images to this, it's incredible. So in the year 2016, we had Brexit and the arrival of Trump. Well, imagine the potential we have to generate successful disinformation. This is very severe. It's not only the definition of a problem against which we can do anything. I'm speaking about the perspective of self-criticism. I think that if other things worked well, and speaking mainly about the media ecosystem, well, this information would be less strong, but the media ecosystem is disastrous, and this is a fertile ground for growth. The conventional media or hegemonic say we will stop disinformation without making any kind of self-criticism. It's disinformation to say there's no climate change, but minimizing the effects of what really it means is disinformation. Well, that you say that you are in favor of the Paris agreements, but when you talk about, or when people talk about tourism, well, not informing about the consequences of tourism is also disinformation. So those media that just see the danger of disinformation as an attempt to recuperate the role they had in society in the past, well, if we don't rebuild a media system that is believable, well, no matter how many laws or things you can create, people will prefer believing Albice or others instead of believing the media. This represents the situation. The big media group in Catalonia is Grupo Godó, and they asked vote for Duran y Lleida, and he got 0 votes. He was not second, he was 0. And Trump won in the US, having the media establishment against him, Fox News and well, you name it. They did all they could to avoid him being the Republican candidate. He won against the media establishment, from Wall Street Journal to The Nation. All of them went against him. So we cannot think about fighting against disinformation if we do not seriously face what is happening with the media ecosystem that, according to the democracies, is the basic access, because this allows information. But if no one believes them, well, I don't have the time, but I would like to explain how to rebuild a media ecosystem that is believable. That for me, it's the first step before any other, so that fake news actually is not efficient anymore. And the alternative journalism or independent journalism, well, they have not been able to be a counterbalance to this. This forces us to enter a complex debate. I used to say we have to depend on the readers, but in times of polarization, readers want to be told what they do think. No media aspires to conduct the role of the media. Well, they said it's a nation debating against itself. This is liberal propaganda, but it's interesting to find newspapers that had plural readers. Now we have readers from the trenches. And if you don't talk about the last crisis of Podemos against Sumar, well, they are angry because they want to hear the answer that they believe in. Independent media, citizens, traditional media. And, well, since I consider that everyone is really concerned about this information, I think it would be really worth it to put the emphasis on ourselves to rebuild a media ecosystem that recuperates the credibility. And this obviously is not traditional media saying that they are the ones that will stop disinformation, because obviously with this structure, society's structure, the shareholders and the business models that are broken, that depend the latest euro that they receive from someone, obviously this is not a healthy media ecosystem capable of facing these brutal challenges. Consider 20 euros per month will allow me to take each one of our voices and say the opposite in Chinese, for example. Good. Let's take a longer perspective, a long-term perspective to see what are the tools that we can use to face all this. I totally agree with what has been said. Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with Maria-Giovanna and with Pere debating about this, and with you, Laia, as well. I share what has been said up until now. Maybe I try to offer other elements after your considerations. One, I believe that what we have to underscore is how disinformation, and at the same time, the actors that are disseminating them, which is the extreme right globally, shows the symptom of the crisis that we are living. As a democratic society or democratic societies, we have structural causes, and obviously, this is key to understand disinformation. When we have 50% of Republican voters that still believe that Trump won the elections of the year 2020, well, there we have a huge problem. That huge problem is also connected to the increase of unbalance, but to lack of trust. This is key, because lack of trust is not only against institutions, it goes beyond what we understand as institutions, government, parliament, political parties, you name it. And this is also connected to another element, which is a term that started circulating in the year 2016, which is the concept of post-truth. The post-truth is not just a lie. I have my truth, and each one of you has your own truth. And this is a huge problem, because this is connected with some changes that have been taking place after the 1980s, after the postmodernism, that well, as a fresh wind and beginning to overcome some locked up visions of the contemporary times. And then this has been used to become an extreme relativism. And then we don't have facts, but we may have facts and alternative facts, according to some. So the background problem has to do with philosophy, political thinking, and our place as human beings in the world. Having said this, we have structural causes that are also more specific, not so philosophical, maybe. However, having said this, I would add another element, something that can be found in the background. After the US elections, we have it in our minds. That is the role that some big entrepreneurs, I call them then the Robert Barnes of the 21st century, they are playing a role in the 21st century. It's true that we cannot think that everything depends on the social networks, because as Peter said, we have the traditional media that well have their own responsibility. Obviously, this happens. They have their share of responsibility in the creation of lies and perceptions. But it's also true that we have figures like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or Zuckerberg that are the kings, the Mambo kings. They do whatever they want to do, and they control with a huge opacity beyond their own personal opinions. Well, they have their own social media companies. And let me add a couple of considerations, and then I'll give you the floor. First, be careful. Let's be careful, because it's very problematic to see how some of these entrepreneurs have changed their vision. Elon Musk, for example, and they decided to defend visions that they consider well, democracy as a failing system. They talk by following Curtis Jarving, creating new absolute monarchies where the king should be the CEO of a company. And here it's not only wanting to become richer, wanting to have more money in my pocket. No, democracy is over, they say, let's go to something else. And the other element that is connected to this is the need, the quick need, because we are running late, to democratize the digital space. And this is not the only battle that is connected to disinformation. It's not only a matter of having a legislation that evidently is trying to limit the dissemination of lies, of extremist speeches, and hate speech. The big thing here is the need for a democratization of the digital area, of the digital space. Thank you. Highly suggestive thoughts. I will try to ask some open questions, and maybe you could determine what the answer is most interesting. One of the considerations I have in mind, I understand this part of one of the origins, the trust in institutions has been lost. Even with the power of laws, we are in this relativism, but it's also true that we've had many real facts that clearly contributed to this lack of trust. We can talk about the cases of corruption. The head of the economic unit in Madrid said, when you try, well, it could be worse. Definitely, it can always be worse. You can find this kind of a generalized anger. But it's also true that from a Marxist perspective, you try to articulate and say, so much anger comes from where exactly? In the US, inflation, so on and so forth, or the popular classes. We've been living contexts of inflation, but that's not enough. In material terms, that's not enough. When, for example, in the case of Spain, we are not at a particularly complex economic situation. 15M exploded in a context of reaction after a crisis of different economic continuous years of a recession. But now we are at a context of growing inequalities. We see these inequalities. But what's happening at the level of popular classes in order to channel things towards this? I can understand lack of trust, for example. But we have another challenge that I would like you to talk about, and that I've been able to talk about. There's a pride in ignorance. When talking about climate change, we have to use scientific evidence, or to fight against racial speech. We have to determine we have to talk about the migratory flows, the economy, etc. I remember that a part of the left wing had told us that talking about data and being rigorous was boring. We had to build a sexier speech when we do our politics. I understand it, because the context is that it's not fashionable to learn. Saying, I am here to study, well, that's not sexy. We have to show pride when we show our stupidity, or not learning, or unlearning. But this is what I see. There's the pride in not knowing. There's the pride in not being rigorous, or not using philosophical or intellectual debate. And I know I'm generalizing the situation greatly, but we have this element. We have small oases where people feel, maybe you could give me some more hints through your opinion on first, why we have such a generalized eclosion, anti-system from here to the rest of the world, and this cult to ignorance, this pride of ignorance. And what are the tools? If culture, evidence, training have been our tools to present our tools. Now, what are our tools? Maybe we could start the other way around. Okay, when we speak about the causes for the vote to the extreme right, we don't mention some elements. One could be the increase in inequality. Here we are connected with the vote in the US. So people say, well, macroeconomic figures were not that bad. But who loses, who wins? Society, inflation has hit the popular classes or the middle classes. This is more complex to define. But this is an element, evidently. I think that this is connected to another element that is, well, it's part of it all. Then we could debate up to which point this is true, up to which point, with respect to 40 years ago, the social elevator has been broken, but the perception of the youngest generations and not so young is that this social elevator is broken, and the perception influences how people see the world and what kind of things they choose to work with, and then the cultural reaction or the cultural clash to some changes we've seen as a society, not only immigration, feminism, LGBTI, Q plus rights, abortion being questioned. This deals with some privileges and divisions of not only masculinity, but as a society sees the world. And some of them, well, they try to either channel or capitalize on that. And then we have another element. Liberal democracies are in a deep crisis. It's true. In practice, this means that if we have between 70 and 90% of people who say that they do not trust the main institutions, then we have a hell of a problem. And here I think is something that we have to consider. We have the atomization of society. Society works democratically because we've learned through our experience. We have intermediate bodies rooted to the territory, participated by people that have that function of a conveyor belt between the citizenship and institutions. Currently, we know that it's not that they have disappeared, that the unions and parties are not what they used to be, and society is more atomized, and this is connected with the other big consequence that sometimes people lose of sight. That is the victory of the neoliberal model in the 80s and 90s. It's not only the increase in inequalities in practice, but a vision of the world that is more individualistic, more competitive, that has consequences, clear consequences. The concept of solidarity is weaker than before. And when people feel lonelier, and they see themselves lonelier without social networks of support or weaker networks of support, and observe extremist, true, false speeches, well, they can be more receptive. Social media have changed many things as well, too. Have unions, parties, organizations, networks, weaker bodies that can play a role in there. And I reckon that these topics of the generalized anger have to be declined, and they are structural elements. And not for just having a Marxist perspective, but the reasons are things that you can touch with your hands and that you have to touch with your hands. I fully agree with what Stephen just said. It all has to do with why some groups succeed. He makes an analysis that I share at 100%, and it helps explain this, but I wanted to focus on the most uncomfortable elements, as you, Laia, said. I don't share the vision of that there are no objective reasons to generate a lack of trust in the material classes, the popular classes. And even if the left, well, I'm not criticizing anyone. I am speaking to provoke, because I think it's very important to recuperate trust. Well, this initial situation is not recognized, and well, it makes it more permeable to lies. In France, the last survey, 70% of the working classes, the workers' classes defined as workers' classes, are now voting Le Pen, or why Trump has the support of 60% of workers, the workers' class. We have to be able to clearly say that the life conditions of popular classes have been worsened in the last 25 years, much worse than expected. We have a great deal of data that prove it, but I have a personal example that has nothing to do with the decisions that I've made. I said I was here and I left Spain, not because I wanted to make more or less money. When I started working at El País newspaper, the base salary was a category called C, and roughly speaking, were represented 30,000 euros per year. 25 years after, this has been substituted by something that called C, D, and you enter without any guarantee to go up with 60% less money. 25 years have gone by, and I'm not only speaking about the latest inflation, 60% less in salaries that we had 25 years ago, not only in El País newspaper, it's happened in many other places. Well, expenses, just now expenses, homes. I lived in Fonrodona Street in Poplar Sec neighborhood. I paid 300 euros for my rent. Now I pay 1,500, 5 times more. Workers' class from Barcelona, 60% less salaries. Well, cancer treatment, $200,000 per year. Wall Street Journal. Well, and entering the Eurozone meant an increase in prices. What costed 100 pesetas would cost €1, 166. It's an increase of 66% overnight. The big crisis of 2008, 2009 led to people losing their savings. Banks were respected. 75 million were sent to banks to rescue them with no counterparts. And then we've seen other questions, Ukraine, inflation, so on and so forth. And every once in a while we continue losing popular classes and in much worse conditions with public services that are much worse because we have more people, less funding, and everything is more complex. When facing this, Trump and populists say, well, you have a reason to be angry. The institutional left wing had to rule over difficult situations. Economy went, well, it represents 3% of GDP, but is it important for my life? I emphasize this part of the debate because in the rest I'm totally in accordance with what he said. The rebuilding of trust has to start by saying, yes, true, popular classes have worsened their life standards. And from here on, this is the political priority. The rest, GDP, I don't know what to say. I mean, GDP. Well, the left wing was in the government and tried to show GDPs that had nothing to do with the popular classes. Trump, Le Pen, and so on and so forth. That will be worse for popular classes. Say, you are absolutely right. I understand you. You have to improve your lives. Well, in order not to have positive lies, we should start with the minimum level of trust. We are not doing the right thing. We have to rethink things. You are lagging behind. You and many other people, popular classes, are lagging behind. So from here on, lies, as he said, and as we can imagine, we'll have to continue actively working, but recognizing, accepting that we are not doing the right job. Maria, you have the floor. Thank you. I was going from English into Spanish. Thank you. To tell you the truth, I would like to go back to what I said before. When I finished my intervention, I said actually that the context of disinformation is not operating in the void. The context is fundamental, and I fully agree with what Sir and Pere said, because I accept the provocation, and it's true that we should be a lot more aware of the social context we are working in and listening to people who say, we have problems and we want to talk about them. For that reason, when you were asking Laia if what are the instruments and what we can do with those, well, my personal perspective is that what we have to do is to work a lot more to strengthen civil society, also to mobilize the social society, the civil society. But we are facing a very complex situation where civil society is criminalized by extreme right governments. We are facing slaps situations, strategic demands against the public participation. We are facing the lack of funds, national and European funds. And all this is something that we should keep in mind because let's not forget that in the European member states, extreme right well, is part of many governments. And right now we have a political majority in the European Union, in the European Parliament. The PP wants to have right, and extreme right will have it, because, as you know, the first measures the extreme right governments undertake are measures against the freedom of expression and press, against civil society, and attacks against the constitutional state. And this is something we see very clearly in countries like Hungary, Italy, and it's really worrying. So let me repeat that this solution has to start by and from the civil society, and it's strengthening. Thank you. Let me launch a final provocation at you. I do share, because I work in about social policies, poverty, growth, inequality. This is a fact. But I also believe that we have to have another finer perspective from the recognition of the worsening of life standards. It's also true that the results are not homogeneous, and it's not the same to see political opinions or the vote declaration based on young men and women, or based on the origin or in the rural or urban origin. And we have some material elements to consider that are not correlated in this way. For example, an apartment is a little more expensive in urban areas, but we still articulate a more progressive perspective in urban areas. This is an example because elements are more complex. When reading this, to be able to, well, for example, Brexit was very clear, the type of debate we generated, but in France, when we started seeing the yellow vests movement. And then maybe a last comment and a last provocation before we give the floor to the audience. Let me first say, let's take the summary of it all. The left wing has to accept that there's a worsening of its life standards, and the political priority has to be life standards and material elements. But at the same time, what we are articulating and how we are moving constantly is that when we speak about minimum wage, we have flags. Ultimately, we did realize that political confrontation is taken back to flags, identity conditions, etc., because there's a will through disinformation to eliminate the focus of attention. We have to place housing, the rent cost in its true context, but we also have to fight against occupation, occupying or squatting homes is another problem. But maybe briefly, very briefly, you could sketch the magic recipe or your prognosis of what we have to do. Next steps. Right now, 2024, Steven said, well, 2024 will be decisive. We have European elections. Well, everything's over. We've seen the result. Oh my God. Well, we are not on the floor, but things can go worse, but not very much. Could you give me some headlines, how to articulate things? We talked about community network, outside of the network, the collective building of structures. Your opinion, maybe how to determine the right agenda, considering a climate emergency and social emergency. How to start, where to start. Thank you. Well, now I'll start with you, Pere. So we had the beginning by different elements. Well, from a political perspective, I don't dare to say It's not up to me. But I do believe that the material conditions are a very important element, and all other questions have to connect to this. Not only one or a counterposition. It's not ones or the others. We have to never lose that perspective. What I more or less know is journalism. That to me is the mother of it all, because if you have a huge agenda and you click the key, but your media ecosystem goes against you, well, that will be good for nothing. You'll have your agenda that will be preaching in the desert. You'll reach no one, at least not through the conventional means. So this topic for me is at the level of the nuclear power. It seems like that I take things to my field, but obviously I know it's not so. But I truly believe that this debate cannot go on. The theoreticians said that the media were the fourth power because thanks to the existence of the media that are independent, it's very important, solvent, serious, rigorous. Well, this would allow a healthy public debate that maybe will allow to have legitimate agendas. But if this, from the very beginning, changed, if this is rotten, well, what happens with the rest? No matter how right you are with your agenda, this is the key central element. And I know that I seem like that I'm taking these questions to my own territory. This is the central element, but maybe then the market can regulate it. It's saying, well, it's a new piece of information, but this information is on a rotten background. This is no business in the media systems of of this country, except for two, El Diario and Confidencial. The rest lose. They have operational losses. None of them is good business. So media that are not good business that depend on third parties have to generate a public debate. And to me, the priority here is to see what is the contribution we can offer. We cannot just finish it in 2 minutes. It's a long debate, but should be our contribution so that we have a media ecosystem that is healthy enough so that we can debate our agendas. Well, otherwise, agendas will stay here and the debate will not be real. So I'm trying to push on this side. We are not on the right side. Our ecosystem is totally rotten. That allowed Trump to be elected in all with all the conventional media against him, and well, people don't believe in the media, and the bad guys will win. Maria Giovanna, tell us.
Sí, gracias.
Give us your opinion.
No,
Thank you.
otra vez,
Again,
la sociedad civil nos va a
civil
poder ayudar
society
aquí. Yo creo
won't
que es
help us
fundamental
here. It
intentar
is fundamental to
establecer
try to
marcos
establish
de escucha
frameworks to
y
listen
de confrontación con la sociedad civil,
and to
en
generate the
entender
confrontation
que
in the civil
ellos
society in
mismos
a
no
context
tienen los
where
recursos
they themselves don't have
necesarios y
the
están
necessary
muy criminalizados. Deben
resources, and
sentir
they're
de
being
eso.
criminalized. I would like to insist on
Un
that.
apunte. Ahora,
Now,
como sabéis,
as you know,
en estos 2 años, a
in these
partir de
last two
ahora,
years,
tenemos que
or the coming 2 years from
realizar
now on, we
un
have to
nuevo
finish
marco de
the new framework
financiación
of
multianual a nivel de la
multi-annual
Unión
funding
Europea.
at the level of the
Me
European Union.
imagino que la
I
extrema derecha
imagine
y la
that the extreme
derecha
right and the right
intentarán
wings will try
buscar lo más
to
posible recursos
get or
por la
take
sociedad
as many
civil,
resources for the civil
recursos
society, resources
importantes
that are
para
important
cuestiones de cambio
for
climático.
questions
Y
of
esto ya lo
climate change.
estamos
And this is
notando
something that we are noticing
en estas últimas
in
semanas,
these last few
en las
weeks, in
dificilísimas
the very
negociaciones que
difficult
estamos
negotiations
teniendo
that
sobre
we are
nuevos
having
comisarios
with respect to the commissioners
designados de la Comisión Europea.
appointed by the
Y,
European Union.
y nada, eso va a ser
This
una primera
will be a
medida para
first
ver
measure to see
cómo nos tenemos que
how
poner en
we have
esta
to
legislatura a ser
act in this
muy,
legislation that will be very,
de
very tough.
oposición.
It
Lo
will be
estamos viendo.
an
Entonces,
opposition legislation.
lo único posible es de verdad trabajar
The only
juntos
possible thing is, working together
a los sindicatos y
with
a la sociedad civil, a
unions
los
and
ciudadanos,
with the civil
porque
society, with the
no hay
citizens,
otra
because
manera
there's no other way to do things right at this moment, I'm afraid. Well, I dare to say something different, maybe. Oh, but jokes apart, I think that on the one hand, something that has been said, and that's a key, and it's not nothing new. These are some headlines, Twitter headlines. Without strong organizations, making politics is very difficult, or really impossible. Can there be digital or online politics? As far as I'm concerned, this is not politics. Poli- Politics is polis, the city, the meeting place. Politics without touching hands to hand, without stepping on a street, without being on the territory. It's a help, but we need to have that. But the question is, how many people feel like doing politics? Maybe they feel like doing it, but they don't know how to communicate with the rest. Or maybe they prefer that someone, is in charge with this. Some people say, I have too many problems to reach at the end of the month in a fair situation, and I won't bother with these other problems. The idea that some people have an idea about what politics should be like, even in the media system that is from the 20th century, and the world has changed, not for the good. But it's true. This means that we have to change everything. Not really, but the context has changed. And then I have two important things. Yeah, if we think, what could the left wing do? One has been repeated, but it's key, which is, start with a cultural battle. This has been done by the right wing for the last 50 years. They have viralized their ideas through fake news and lies. They decided to do some work. They had to disseminate their ideas, their speech, so that then the speech is more accepted by people. Not that the left wing stopped fighting culturally, but we have to insist on it. And cultural fight doesn't mean cultural wars. No, this is something that someone is doing in the left wing, because playing in a field that is used by the extreme right in political sciences, we see that this is not going to help build a political and cultural hegemony. And ultimately, I fully agree, Peter, with you. Popular classes live worse than before. Sure, here we have some information, it's clear. But then I fear to see that some minority sectors of the left wing that say they criticize all that the left wing has done, progressing with nuances, with errors, with obstacles, on, with respect to some battles connected to the civil rights. I do not think that Sarah Wagenknecht to just give a face is showing the way that the left wing should take. Wagenknecht tell people, I'm listening to you, you're worse. But at what price? What is the price? Well, the Fuchsia left wing has been too feminist or has been too environmentalist, pro migration, etc. Here, the key is to have or see the big challenge, building future vision full of hopes that connects with all these struggles and fights. Maybe we have a silly example that is easy to understand. A cashier, a woman that lives a precarious situation, she's a migrant. Is this workers' class? Is this just a woman? Is she a migrant? No, it's the three elements, the three definitions. That is the situation. Very easy to say it and very complex to do. But I believe that the way should lead us to that direction. Well, thank you so much. I will, I will open up some space for debate. We have two questions just in case you feel like asking if you... Yes, two questions. Okay. We'll take these two questions and maybe you can finish this debate. Don't you think it's a mistake by progressive people on the left wing to leave the social network X and leave that area for the right wing and extreme right? And Joan is over there and has another question. I didn't want to ask a question, but make a comment. Beyond the conventional media, those that are in the hands of the political parties and the big media that are in the hands of the banking institutions, currently in Spain, and only in Spain, we have 2,972 digital media that are considered mass media communication, and most of these media live from institutional publicity, from the governments and public companies that depend on the governments. They do not even have an editor's structure because they are devoted to disinformation. They generate losses and they declare benefits. Not even a single public body in Spain can stop this situation. This is a very sad situation. We have two possible instruments that we should enact, considering the European regulation mentioned by Maria-Giovanna. One of them is the reform of institutional publicity, avoiding things to happen as they are happening, and the other one, which is fundamental as far as I'm concerned, that there is a state media council that has a punishing capacity and that can order things. Without this, there is no possibility to reform the media ecosystem. Any other question? That's the moment, or remain silent. I will give myself the privilege as the organizer of the event. We could be here for hours considering our speakers, but we have two things to say. One is we still have a lot to analyze what's happening in the US elections. One of the areas that we have in our political systems is to find solutions to or not to find solutions to the big questions. And secondly, in the US or from the US, we see that the left wing, Stephen said it very well, the extreme right are following more advanced structures. People are not voting for their interests, but they're voting for the identity. And that's tough to accept in our world, in our culture, and determining where we come from. Because it's difficult to fight against a perception that maybe you, from the outside, can find clashing against your interests. And here we'll see a general surprise with Trump, or black men voting Trump. It's the proof that we have to move quickly, accepting there's a movement and that we may be sad, but we have to adapt to it and accept it. Secondly, it's very clear that what made what allowed the opening of disinformation, Trump and Valencia, is that we're not facing a bunch of Nazi freakies, but this is the most similar to an international movement because in Spain, the extreme right has better relations, international relations, than the Popular Party. Currently, Spain is a key piece of this game. That is part of a global mesh, and this forces us to try to find solutions. But make a good diagnosis and determine that we truly need to have a certain international group, international of something, democratic international alliances that come from this autonomous region or from the country, because we need cross-sectional structures, political, scientific, union-oriented structures. And I believe that the challenge here is to organize. For example, do we have to leave from Twitter? I would like to decide this. There should be a set of considerations on whether we have to go beyond my opinions, but we have to find the general opinions. And I'm proposing not a magic bullet, but something that gives me a certain hope, considering that considering that it's today's Monday and we should leave or go towards Friday with a certain perspective. Lula, for example, in Brazil. Lula in Brazil came back for many reasons. He's a charismatic person. He was in jail, and that gave him a different vision. He's lived in jail. He's lived the right-wing offensive, but he fought his battles more adapted to reality, and he was able to see things that are hard for the left wing to say. We have to be less careful and be able to play with certain rules, being very pragmatic, that sometimes clash against our cultural identity as left-wing participants. Sometimes we don't dare to fight with certain rules, but the reality of the world forces us to do so. One more, and we answer and we finish. Mine is a brief question. Part of the problem is media and digital networks that have a oligopolistic structure. Why aren't we proposing, or why cannot we propose a radical change and observing the new markets, new media markets in Europe? If Article 3 says or has a competence to maintain the rules of the competence in an inner market, should be in the hands of the European Union. And we should try to implement antitrust laws like digital reforms, so that not everything is in the hands of oligopolists that are directly attacking the democracy. So, why are we talking about this? And when we go to the root of a market that is not working, that is corrupted. Thank you. We have little time to answer. Maria, maybe could you say something about the regulatory mechanisms? Then Pere and then Steve, and that'll be it.
Sí,
So,
no, la verdad es que estoy muy
tell
de
you the truth,
acuerdo.
I fully
Sí,
agree with
hay
many of the
muchos
things that
problemas y
have been said. We have to the root of the problems,
parte de ellos
and part of them
es la fiscalización, ¿no? Y cómo la
include
regulación,
fiscalization,
primero,
how
la competencia de la Unión
well, the
Europea, si
competences
podemos
of the European Union
extenderla
if
cubrir
should
los
be
temas que
extended
habéis
to
comentado.
cover
Por
different elements that you
supuesto, esto
mentioned.
es
Obviously,
es
this
nuestra
is
prioridad.
our
Tengo que ser
priority.
sincera
I
también,
have to be sincere.
ha sido una posición que hemos
There's been
tomado
a
durante
position
las
that we have
negociaciones de
taken
la
during
última
our negotiations in
legislatura.
the last
Lo que
legislation,
pasa es que no ha sido
but
la
it's
posición
not been the
mayoritaria.
majority
Y
position.
el desafío que tenemos
And
es
the
que
threat
en
and
este
the challenge we have right now
contexto
in this
con
political
mayorías aún
context with
más en contra de un
majorities
proyecto,
against
digamos,
a
democrático
democratic
y a
project
nivel de ambición
with
europea,
different levels of
nos
European
enfrentamos
ambition,
con todo lo
make us
contrario, ¿no?
face the
Entonces,
rather the opposite
intentaremos
situation.
seguir,
So we will try to
seguir en esta
continue
dirección,
following
pero
this
sabiendo
direction,
que el reto
knowing
es
that the
importante.
challenge is
Por eso
important.
la
That's
implementación
why
de
the
lo que
implementation
tenemos
of
ya
what we
es
have
algo
now
también crucial.
is
Y uno de los
a crucial
problemas
element. One of the
con los
problems
que
that
encontramos
we
es esta
find
función, ¿no?, de
is that
fiscalización
function of
que
fiscalization that
la normativa europea otorga
this
a las
European
mismas empresas
regulation
privadas que
gives the
sí
private
tienen
companies
intereses
that do have
contundentes
interests,
con precisamente los
opposing
que la
interests with
legislación
those that
europea tiene que
the
tener.
European
Y
legislation should
ahí
have.
creo que también
And
en la
there,
situación
uh, considering
de las decisiones
the
del
decisions
Tribunal Europeo
made by European
de
Court
Derechos Humanos,
of Human Rights,
podríamos ir
well,
avanzando en
could
ese
allow us
sentido.
to
Y
progress
para también
into the
contestar a
future,
la
and also to
pregunta
answer the
de lo
question
que se hizo
of
online
what
sobre
happens
si teníamos que
online
dejar a
about
X o
whether
no,
had to leave
es una
X
pregunta
or not. This is
muy
a
fundamental
very
y
fundamental
son discursos que
question,
también hemos
and these are elements that
tenido
we um,
en relación con la plataforma
had to
TikTok
consider,
antes
considering
y
TikTok platform before.
no es muy fácil dar una
It's not
respuesta
so
sí o
easy
no,
to
¿no?
give a yes no
Pero
answer,
estoy segura de
but I believe
que
that
lo que tenemos que discutir
what we
son
have to talk
alternativas
about are
y eso
alternatives,
tampoco se ha
and this
hecho de una manera
has not
muy
been
fundamental
done
hasta
very
ahora
fundamentally
y es
up until
otro
now.
reto que
And
tenemos
this
que
is another
asumir
challenge
a
that we
todos los
have to
que
add
estamos
to those that we
viviendo en estos próximos
are
años.
living in the current moment. Thank you. Briefly, I see it very difficult to regulate the oligopolic markets. It's a very special market. We can, no one makes money with this. Very few people make money. And we have 2,920 companies that are oligopolic. So our problems, well, could be improved legally, but they have to do with transparency and how to also articulate systems that do not depend on the market. If this is basic for democracy, well, that shouldn't represent the market. It shouldn't be up to the market to regulate at all. So we have other interests. I think that oligopoly is not the right approach, but anything that can be studied would probably improve the current situation. But before reaching what John Busquets said, we can do many other things without expecting any change in the regulations. The first announcer in this country is the government of Spain. Ayuso and company are terrible, but the government of Spain spends 150 million euros in institutional publicity. Most of it goes to El Mundo, go to La Vanguardia, and 80% of their publicity come from the government of Spain. So I would really Though I rejected everything and I would accept silly things, but I would accept to know that governments made. How can it pay for it all? In Catalonia, we had it during the tripartite. We have the full list of the 30 something billion, which is a lot of money too, spent in institutional policy. We know who received what. Well, you can go to the mercantile record and you see Grupo Godot, the Godot Group. Maybe if we ask for a chair in the board of directors, that would be fantastic. Maybe the government of Spain, left-wing government, could tell us more about it. 150 million euros. Who's taking the big part of it? If we know that, it would be incredible. And with respect to social media, I would never dare to say or tell people what to do. I am in favor to be in the places where people are. If I am invited to go to La Sexta, I go there. I know that Elon Musk is a son of a bitch and he used big data and so on and so forth. But if people are there, are in La Sexta, well, I'd rather go there than being in a TV network that has no audience. Well, right now we have people who agree on the basics. I personally would rather be in X in spite of Elon Musk and that bunch of trash because alternatives are irrelevant. Or rather than just have a chat with friends. On X, for example, in the Context magazine, in the editorial board, we've had chats about this, and some people said that yes, that some other people said that no. I don't have a clear idea about this. I don't have a clear opinion. What Pere says is true, but you say, do I have to follow this bunch of trash instead of being in the social media? Let's go to the street. I know it's a populist answer, but there's a part of truth in it. And let me briefly add two other considerations about what you, Mark, said. What really worries me, seeing the results in the elections, is that Trumpism and Bolsonarism, just to give two clear cases, that lost after being in the presidency. Well, Trump won again. In Brazil, we'll see what will happen. Well, they've been consolidated as a social bloc. To me, that is the most dramatic situation. Trump has improved the results in 2020, but there's been a demobilization of the democratic electors. And in Brazil, with Bolsonaro, between 18 and 22, things were consolidated. And I'm afraid the same will happen with Milei in Argentina, beyond what he says, what he does, and who he is, Milei. And the second topic that really worries me is international right-wing networks. They have to do with the religious traditionalism, the ultra-conservative values. And, well, the extreme right wing has been doing so directly or indirectly for the last, 20, 30 years. And oftentimes we don't really know that this exists. But Heritage Foundation, that, we've heard a lot about this because of the 2025 project. Well, they have tentacles in different countries like Spain. And that very few people know, except for some journalists that have done some research in private universities, in companies. Gosh, these are people have over 100 million euros income per year. We have an endless list. This is one thing. But what do we have from other positions? What's happening in other areas? Behind it, you have people who will just add lots of money. These networks are very solid, and they create speeches, legal proposals. They use what worked in this country and adapt it to another country. How many of you know about Alliance in Defense of Freedom? Do you know Alliance in Defense of Freedom? Who are these guys? They have 200 millions approximately of dollars on a yearly basis for activities of any kind. In the US, these guys have been working for some 40 or 50 years. They have 6 headquarters in Europe for the last decade, in Brussels, Geneva, Luxembourg. I don't know where else. Where? well, whatever. You have the Court of Justice, Parliament of Europe, your European Parliament. They work. Well, Maria Giovanna, I'm sure, knows that about it. Well, petrol, oil companies, tobacco companies, weapons companies. These people create new laws to prohibit abortion, gender problems, LGBTIQ+. They've been working for a long time. They have money and they have very well prepared, very well trained people. They are not just a silly bunch of dorks. No, this is a problem. They are well trained. Well, good enough. Thank you so much to the three of you. I think that the summary should be let's not bring our arms down. You know, meeting beyond the network is important. Here you have a few beautiful public sphere to have an agora. And Maria Giovanna shared a document with us because talking to her from the Greens, they prepared a report about how disinformation had affected the different electoral results in the different European states. And here we can include Spain. She shared a link with us that we can also share with the rest of you. So we'll continue thinking about it all, and I hope to see you very, very soon. Good evening. Thank you.